I just want to say good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, Getting to Know UDL, a Starter Kit of Ideas, presented by the wonderful Louis Lord Nelson. My name is Naya Hyde, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm a marketing assistant at Brooks Publishing, who is a proud sponsor of today's webinar. I'm also happy to announce that we are offering a 20% off discount at brookspublishing.com with code edWebUDL. This offer is applicable to most Brooks products, including Louis Lord Nelson's new release. We are also doing a giveaway today. 3 lucky winners will receive a free copy of Design and Deliver, Planning and Teaching Using Universal Design for Learning, the second edition. The winners will be selected at random from the chat, and we will announce them after today's webinar, so be sure to stay active in the chat to increase your chances of winning. Without further delay, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Louis Lord Nelson is an internationally recognized leader in universal design for learning implementation. A former special education teacher, she held the first known school district-based UDL coordinator position, completed her UDL postdoctoral fellowship at CAST, and is part of the UDL Implementation and Research Network Leadership Council. She has worked with educators across the United States, Africa, Asia, Canada, Europe, and Australia. Her publications include the second edition of Design and Deliver, Planning and Teaching Using Universal Design for Learning, The Role of Technology in Implementing Universal Design for Learning, Culturally Responsive Design for English Learners, the UDL Approach, and A Tree for All, your coloring book of UDL principles and practice. She also hosts the popular podcast UDL in 15 Minutes, listened to in over 52 countries, and the new podcast UDL Research in 15 Minutes, both found at theudlapproach.com/podcasts. Welcome, Louis, and we are so happy for you to be here with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I also want to share that I'm going to be looking, like I can look over here to see messages and I can look over here for my timer. And so anyway, I won't always be looking straight at you. I apologize. All right, let's get started. By the end of this session, my hope for you is that you're going to understand the intent of the Universal Design for Learning framework, and that you're going to identify how to take some initial steps within your learning environment. So we'll get there. Now, first off, there are some materials that are available for you. And if you look in your chat section, then that will give you information on how to get there. I'm going to show you really quickly what you're going to see. There is a document. Again, you have access to this. You will want it. Hopefully you'll be able to download it, use it even if you got your phone, because there's some live links we'll be using. And then otherwise there is information in here that's just good resource stuff that I have for you. But you're going to want to have that. So I'm kind of talking through this, giving you all time so that you can have that up as you need it. I'm going to take us back over to the presentation. All right. There's another document that we'll use. That'll be later. Okay, so 4 areas in your toolbox that we're going to use for this hour to organize the hour are the metacognitive piece of this, the thinking about your own thinking, the content or conceptual piece where you're going to understand the concepts of UDL. Moving into the process task, which is to investigate some helpful tools about UDL. And then a strategic piece, which is to investigate strategies and methods that you can use to improve your use of the UDL framework. So actually, these categories are categories for scaffolding that I talk about with Patty Ralabate in a book that we have together. But I decided, man, they're fantastic to organize this hour. Okay, let's think for a minute about the metacognition of teaching. Now, like I said, you have this document that you've just brought up, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time after I talk through this to ask you to either look at one of the 2 articles, and those articles are getting you to think about what processes you use to examine your teaching. So you can look at one of those, or there's a video that you can watch, and the question is, how does the reflective process benefit you? Now, this video is a little less than 4 minutes. The first part of it, you're watching someone during a keynote that he does. He has got some really good comments about the reflection, the active reflection. And then the last part or the latter part of the video is quotes, kind of inspirational quotes around a reflection. So if that's something that floats your boat, watch that video. If you want to look at one of the 2 articles, that's perfect. Scan across them, what have you. But this is what I'm going to invite you to do. Now, let me show you again. When you're looking at your resource, right up here is the same activity that I just talked about. So you're going to choose one of these 2 articles. Maybe you'll look at both of them. I don't know. Or click on that video. So here's the deal. Most people have a handy dandy phone around, or maybe you have a smartwatch. You can set 4 minutes for yourself, or I will come back to you in 4 minutes. Don't worry, just keep your sound up. But go ahead, start your 4 minutes and start examining things. See you in 4. All right, I'm going to ask you to come back. You have this. Okay, so UDL relies on reflective teaching. You got to be reflective if you're going to use this framework. It is so not something that you just kind of check through and go through. This is a practice and a group of practices that will make you reflect. And it demands that if you're really going to be implementing. So it's a framework that's going to guide your design, and it's guiding the design of your learning environment and your lessons. So I keep talking about the learning environment, and there's a reason why, and I'll get to that. Okay, we're going to move into the concepts and the nuts and the bolts. I'm going to ask you to take a poll. It's asking you, I am just now learning about UDL, beefing up my knowledge about UDL, or able to teach others about UDL. Let's see what we've got. All right, we're leaning towards the beefing up my knowledge of UDL. Seems like there's more of you there. The just learning about UDL, you're next. And then I've got, so that's, about 50%, somewhere in there, of beefing up of you that are attending this call. And then about 40%, it seems like, are just now learning about UDL. And 11% of you are able to teach others about UDL. And welcome to you all. So those of you who are just learning about UDL, there's definitely going to be some baby steps here to help you understand how this whole thing is kind of put together. The beefing up your knowledge, hopefully you're going to hear some ideas, and actually just participating in this particular webinar, you're going to see how I'm using the UDL framework in my design. And the others that you're able to teach others about UDL, I don't know, maybe you'll pick up some ideas of what you want to use in your own environment. Here's hoping, right? Okay. So a really quick overview of the organization. Many of you are probably familiar with the periodic table of elements, and that is a framework. It is a collection of information about the elements, right, that we have around our Earth. And it gives us a sense of how those interrelate, tells us atomic weight, gives us just really good information about those individual elements. But that is a framework. That's exactly what you're looking at here. It's a collection of all this information that's been organized in a way that once you understand the organization, you can use it really effectively. So first of all, UDL is based in neuroscience, in neuropsychology. And I'm going to tell you more about this in a little bit, but that's why the brains are there, to remind us of the affective networks, the recognition networks, and the strategic networks. But more importantly, you see across the top, engagement, representation, action, expression. Those are the names of the principles. So you have the left column, which is in green, engagement, the center column, purple, representation, the right column, blue, action and expression. Okay, underneath those, there are guidelines. There are 9 of them. So you see the 9 boxes, 3 under each of the principles. The guidelines is another way of organizing this information. And once you really get into it, then it's the checkpoints, okay? And the checkpoints are really where you get your deeper descriptions of the information that's written here. I will say, and CAST agrees, CAST, they're the ones who created these UDL guidelines, and they're out there and they're available for any of us to use free of charge. And I'm going to tell you about their website to be able to go look at these things. But even they say that the language that's here, it's really not accessible. It's kind of hard to understand. They really had to squish a lot of concepts into these phrases. So if you read this and at first you're like, I don't really understand what I'm supposed to do, that's okay. That is really okay. It just means, you got to take a little step further in. Okay, let me keep going with the organization. These 3 tabs down the left-hand side, you see access, build, and internalize. I'm going to start with access. That access level, I like to call it the welcome mat. These are the things that you're doing in your learning environment and also in your lessons that make sure that any child, any learner can participate. So I'm just going to give an example here under recruiting interest, right? You see those 3 checkpoints. There's individual choice and autonomy, there's the relevance, value, and authenticity, and there's minimizing threats and distractions. You're going to be using a mixture of these things as you get to know UDL. If you're just starting, I'm going to say you're going to choose one of them and you're going to really work to build that into your environment. But I'm going to give the example of relevance, value, and authenticity. So your students come into your classroom, I'm assuming, but maybe you aren't in a 4-walled classroom. Wherever you're teaching is your environment. You want them to walk in and already sense that it just feels like a learning environment that feels real to them, meaning they're going to connect. They see something that interests them. Maybe it's, pop stuff. I don't know. But for our young guys, right? Maybe it's stuff that they're watching on their YouTube channels, right? How do you find this stuff out? You ask the kids. You find out what they're connected to in their life outside of the classroom. And you bring little pieces of that in, the music, right? Knowing about maybe some of the TV shows, stuff like that. But that's connecting it. And you connect that into also your lessons. So that's just one example. Access. Now let's look to the internalize. I'm going to take you to the bottom of this. At this point, this is when we're helping our learners. We're giving them opportunities to really take ownership of that learning, right? So they're starting to learn, for example, those personal coping skills, but we have to teach them. They don't come right in there. So we're helping them learn those. We're giving them lots of different ways to learn those coping skills, for example. That build level in between, it's kind of like a bridge, right? They've started with access and we need to get them to that internalizing. We need to give them practice as they're working toward, and we're giving them opportunities to internalize. That's what all that means. Now, at the very bottom, if somebody comes up to you and they say, they wouldn't say Louie, that's my name, but they say, Louie, what's the point of UDL? Why? What's the goal? And you say, so that every student has the opportunity to become an expert learner. Well, what's an expert learner? Well, that's a learner who understands what it means to be purposeful and motivated, what it means to be resourceful and knowledgeable, what it means to be strategic and goal-directed, and what those things mean in their own lives and in their own learning. Now, some of you may be thinking, I teach kindergarten, and I'm going to say, yeah, you do. And those students can walk away with these things. Any learner knows what it feels like to be purposeful, to really be intent with what they're doing. Any learner knows what it feels like to be motivated and unmotivated, and they can learn the skills to help them maintain that motivation. And you can see where I'm going with this. All right, so that's how this is organized. Next thing I want you to know, all of these different research areas are in UDL. So when somebody says, so is there research? Yes, it's research-based. And there are now thousands of articles, research about the implementation of UDL, and it keeps getting better and better and better and better and better. But what I want you to know is that all of these areas are in there. So ed psych, special ed, education, neuropsychology, psychology. The special education part, yes, UDL did start with students who had more significant disabilities, but it very quickly branched beyond that because our wonderful people at CAST realized that all of this stuff benefited every student. There is no negative side to this. It benefits all students. But more importantly, what they realized is something called variability. So you see at the bottom here, learner variability, and then you have these 5 blocks above it: accessibility, flexibility, goals, rigor, and choice. Those are what I kind of call the hidden parts of UDL. You don't see them in the graphic organizer, but they are grounding. They are the base. Learner variability is what I'm going to talk about in more depth in a minute, but let me go through these 5. So accessibility, talked about that a little bit at the top, but UDL is about letting every learner access learning, every learner. The flexibility part is 2 things. Number 1, you will see influences of digital technology in the UDL framework and referenced. And yeah, it's true, that can be really helpful. And the reason why, when we talk about flexibility, it's because a learner can sit in front of a screen and they can choose whether or not they want every word highlighted as they read and they're learning to decode. They can choose whether or not they want to have the word defined for them. They can choose if they want the print enlarged or if they want to tighten it up and see more pages on their screen. You can tell I'm talking about student ownership, right? They're the agents of their own change. That happens with the flexibility of technology. Now, you don't have to have that. You can still have options that are low and even no tech, and students are still learning how to make choices among those materials. But the other flexibility part lies in us. We have to be able to look at a situation, and I don't know about you, but I know in the classroom, I mean, not every day was terrific, right? Like not every lesson went perfectly. And if I wasn't flexible in the moment, boy, did it go down the drain fast, right? But I had to be flexible in the moment, take the reading, realize not going well, need to make some changes. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Goals are crucial in universal design for learning. Some people use SMART goals because they help, but the most important part of the goal is understanding that you're not locking students into one way of learning it or one way of showing you how they know it. UDL is all about those options, and so that students have multiple ways of showing you. Remember, two is options, and 2 means choice, meaning you can choose between 2 things, or they can choose between showing you in 2 different ways, for an example. Rigor. There's a myth out there that UDL makes things easier, and that is a total myth. It's a total myth. When you remove the barrier, let's say you have a student who's not doing so well with decoding right now, all right? But you need them to be able to comprehend what's going on in the story that they're reading. So then they can, move on to the next part of that lesson or that activity, or just even showing you that they understand and they comprehend it. Well, the decoding's getting in the way of that. If you know the goal and your goal is for them to show what they comprehended, then you understand that the decoding, you got to remove that barrier, right? And I've got some people that are, wait, Louie, no. They need to practice decoding all the time. You can have specific time and support and make that a safe space for them to practice their decoding. But what's more important at that point in that lesson, because you knew it in your goal, was to say, I need to lower the barrier so they can decode this stuff. And then they can show me how well they comprehended. Where the rigor comes in is when we remove that barrier, we are moving those students up Bloom's taxonomy. They're no longer repeating things to us. They're no longer memorizing. Now they're applying. And what's even better is when they get up there to the creation, very top of the new revised Bloom's taxonomy. And then choice, as I talked about already. You want your students to be able to make choices because that's how they become agents. That's how that self-determination grows. All right, let me chat a little bit about the learner variability and the learning environment. So any learner You're in the context of a learning environment. And that means you have relationships with other people. You have relationships with your own emotions of how you're reacting to things. You have a relationship with how things work in that environment, like how is time handled in that environment, as an example. And you have a relationship with the subjects and the materials that are used to teach those subjects. So what learner variability gets to is that not only every learner learns differently. So we already know that. Every learner learns differently. We're all unique, right? We know that. Okay. But we're also learning differently based on the context. Now, I'm going to share something with you that helps hit the context piece home. So my mother very suddenly, and it was a surprise to us, but she passed away on July 30th of last year. Very sudden, very unexpected. So while I have moved through the grief of that, as one does, that is still in my context. And there are days when I absolutely cannot focus for whatever the amount of time is. My grief is so great still at this point, but that is my context. Why would we not think that that same type of thing happens with our learners, no matter their age? Every person experiences the context, and context also sits within us. And we have to remember that. So when we think of, for example, trauma-informed practices, or when we have students who are in trauma, we don't know when that context comes up for them, but we need to have those practices prepared. And that's what UDL helps us understand, because when you're understanding UDL, you're understanding this learner variability piece. Now, to help you get to this a little better, in that document that I shared with you that you've already opened up, you can either go there or you can look at your screen. Hopefully this is big enough for you to see. But my dear friend Liz Hartman created this table for a blog that I asked her to write. And I love this. So left-hand side, embracing learner variability is when, and she gives some descriptions. The center column, someone who holds a traditional view of learning might say, and then the right column is a UDL-inspired teacher might say. I'm going to give you 4 minutes to read through this table. That's a minute per row. So go across row by row by row and really think about what you're reading. And what I want you to reflect on is, where do you sit between the second column and the third column? Do you feel like right now you're more toward the second column? Or do you feel like you align with that right-hand column, even if you're brand new to UDL, but you feel like, I think I align with that right-hand column? So take the next 4 minutes and you can put your thoughts into the chat. So go ahead and get started. Nice. Okay. So many great comments. So good. Okay. So when we are using universal design for learning, it really challenges us to understand the difference of when we are being definitive and when we are being flexible. So let's look at some things where we can be definitive. We could know quality practices, right? And we can know where those quality practices can fit. There was somebody in the chat that talked about scripted curriculum. I work with teachers in Malawi and in Uganda, and there is pretty much scripted curriculum in both of those countries, but we're bringing universal design for learning in. And what we're finding is teachers are finding the room. They're finding the moments where we can squeeze in a little bit of choice here and there, even if it's where the students sit in the classroom, even if it's when they choose their partner, because these are things like choosing a partner, it's written in the curriculum, they work with a partner, but the choice isn't there, right? Or where they get to sit, that's not in the curriculum. So we keep finding these spaces, find the spaces so that our students can learn that agency. Okay, but that comes from knowing practices. Your brain is opened up to these things. Understanding your own needs as a learner. You have to understand what your needs are as a learner and you'll be way more connected to your learners as learners. And then pretty much another definitive thing is what time it is. Not a whole lot of other things are definitive in the classroom setting, right? You got to be so flexible. So knowing what practices your students are going to respond to. It is true that we know certain things work for our students most of the time, but there are always those days. You know, the studies that say there's no such thing as like the full moon effect. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Yes, I believe based on their research, but I just know what it's also like. So you got to be flexible in those times. Knowing your learners, this is a huge one. It's very important for us to know our learners, and it's a very serious thing for us to know our learners. But the day that we believe we know a learner so well that we're going to know their next move is the day we do not know our learner. We have to always give our students the right to be the individuals and the unique individuals that they are. When we give them that right and we give them that space and we are ready with our flexibility, we become better instructors. And the last thing, what you can get done in the next 10 minutes. I don't know about you, but I always overestimate what I can get done in the next 10 minutes. So I have to learn to be flexible about that and give up a few things off my checklist, right? Okay. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a run through here on the 3 major principles, because toward the end, you're going to apply a little bit of this information. Engagement. What is this all about? Well, our affective network's kind of the dead center of our brain. That's where our emotion centers sit. And we already know that there are differences in our neurology, our culture, our personal relevance, the things that are listed here, subjectivity, and then the stuff that I described previously, right? All that like how you walk into a context and then what you bring with you, all of that is so different. There's no single type of engagement that's going to work for all of our learners, and we got to give multiple options. So that's why when you look at the principle of engagement, you see 10 different checkpoints there, and those checkpoints are even chock full of more information. So at some point, you're going to help your students kind of minimize threats and distractions, and I'll give you an example about that a little later. But you're also, and maybe you're going to do that by helping them collaborate with a partner. I saw earlier that, I can't remember your name, I'm sorry, somebody talked about crowdsourcing, like they've set up crowdsourcing in their classrooms. And that's a great way to build collaboration and community, but then also potentially minimize some threats and distractions for your students, right? And they know that when they walk in. So while you may use it in a lesson, it's part of your environment because they know that that opportunity is there. And engagement is all about our affective networks kicking up in a sense that it feels good. The learning feels good. Not that it's easy, but it feels good. There's that right level of challenge. All right, the recognition networks. This is the one a lot of teachers really like to start here because it's kind of what we do. It's what how we're representing the information to our learners, right? It's how they perceive and comprehend, but that varies in every single learner. And we know that the learning and the transfer of knowledge, we've got to have multiple representations for that to happen. It's just not going to happen with a single representation. And we know, again, that not every representation works for every learner. And this is where that crowdsourcing comes in so handy again, right? Because as the students are sharing with you how they're building their knowledge, then you're building your own resource list, right? So when we look at representation, we're thinking about how the students perceive the information from the get-go, how they're hearing it, how they're seeing it, how they're experiencing it, how they are able to relate to the language and the symbols that are being shown to them, how they're best able to connect to those, and then how they're comprehending that big picture, how they're seeing these relationships, right? How they're able to really generalize things. And then the last one on the right-hand side is the strategic networks, our action expression up in the front, the frontal lobe area. This is where we're kind of navigating that environment, and we get to express what we know. We use a lot of strategy. We have to practice and learn how to organize things. We know that. And again, You got to give a lot of variety here. So the physical action at the top, this just purely means that you're giving all of your students a way to show you what they know. And for some students, that may require single switch devices. And for some of your learners, they are able to create, using the pen and pencil, paper, what have you. But that guideline helps remind us, again, that we're thinking about all learners. So expression and communication, this is about, gathering all the tools and getting the kids, letting them have the opportunity to practice with all these things. And then executive functions, right? Using that frontal lobe for goal setting and decision making and moving forward in that. Okay. So I got a couple of questions for you, and these are true or false. The intent of the UDL framework is to give learners the opportunity to work toward becoming expert learners. The intent. Is that true or false? Just put one of those in the chat. Let's see. True, 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 true. Yay! It's like going, it's awesome. Okay. The UDL framework is only for students with disabilities. True or false? And now the switchover happens. Nice. All right. You got 2 of the commandments down. That's awesome. Okay. Helpful tools and resources. As stated at the beginning, I run a podcast called UDL in 15 minutes, and there is a table of episodes. This is included in that resource packet that I gave to you. At the top, there are these several podcasts, kindergarten teachers, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 3rd and 4th grade. However, I tell you in the intro to my UDL in 15 minutes podcast, you should listen to all grade levels, even at the college level. You will take things away. And the people who do it, they always email me. You were right. You'll get stuff. But if you really want to concentrate on folks that are in your teaching area and grade levels, here you go. Laura Taylor, kindergarten teacher. She's now probably, I think she's in her 28th year. Okay. I love this example. Laura just learned about UDL maybe 4 years ago or so. And so this is a quote from her podcast. She's sitting back, crossing her arms during the week-long training. And she's like, yeah, I already do this stuff. This is the stuff I do. And then she got to the point where she was like, oh, you know what? I bet this training is for those middle school and high school teachers. Because, we do the right stuff, in the kindergarten area. And then she got to the point where she was like, oh, okay, I don't do all of this. There are some parts here I'm going to learn. There are a lot more layers and levels than what I thought there were. So once she really got into it. So what did she hear, and what do others hear that are just learning about UDL? Maybe you're experienced in teaching and you're new to this, or maybe you're new to teaching, but even when you're fresh out of your university or your teacher training program, you're thinking, I got this, right? Well, the whole thing of expert learner is always a big takeaway for people once they click into it. Because once you start examining your learning environment and your lessons, and you start asking yourself, where am I allowing my students to be purposeful in their learning? Where am I setting them up to be motivated? And how am I helping them understand their own motivation? How am I helping them become more resourceful, learning how to find things, get things on their own? How am I helping them to assess their own knowledge, keep track of it, be proud of it, and know when they need to get a little bit more? How am I helping them be strategic in what they're doing and goal-directed throughout my learning environment and throughout all of my lessons? That sounds like such a heavy load, and I get that, but that's what all that information in the framework is helping you do. That's why you're using those checkpoints to figure out what you want to incorporate into your environment and lessons. So the choice, the rigor, and the design are also pieces that people hear and go, oh, that choice. You got to make them make decisions. They got to learn how to make those decisions and think about those decisions, reflect on them, right? And then that access, they're getting that. the rigor, they're getting that because we've given them the access and the flexibility to help them reach those higher levels. And then the designing of beginning with your goal. You've got to know what your goal is. I do like an hour workshop on UDL and goal writing. And every time I have people say, oh my gosh, when I think this hard about my goal, my lesson is planned. It's just done. Yeah. When you sit and you work that hard on your goal, your lesson blossoms. All right. So another resource, if you tweet, you're going to want to know about this. If you don't tweet, you might want to know about this. So UDL chat, first and third Wednesday of the month. It's out of the US, so 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But this is where somebody leads the questions, and then we all are responding with what we think about it. And you don't follow every one of them, just like you can't follow them here. And you just kind of respond to the ones that you think, wow, that hits home for me. It's just a nice way to connect with other like-minded people. We have to do that. We have to do that as educators. And then if you also are on Twitter, you want to follow cast_UDL. All of their accounts are under that. So if you're interested in accessible educational materials, the AIM Center, then you follow cast_UDL. The UDL IRN, that's the Implementation and Research Network. It's also under the umbrella of UDL, but it's a little separate arm. And then hashtag A11Y. That stands for accessibility because there are 11 letters between the A and the Y for accessibility. So it shortens it out. But if you put the hashtag in and you search hashtag A11Y, then you see all of the tweets that have come out that deal with accessibility. And you'll see a lot of them deal with UDL. Okay. Lastly, I've given you reliable blogs about UDL and online learning. And I say reliable for a reason, because not everything out there about UDL is reliable. But if you're curious about how this connects and you want to start looking at that, because we're blossoming out of it in some places, but I know it's hybrid for many of you. Everything's been online for me. It's been very different, right? So helping you understand and see that connection and what you can do. There's that list. It's in that resource document. Okay, so let's look at investigating some strategies and methods. Like I talked about first, we're going to talk about your environment. I'm going to do just a real quick talk through on a few of these things. We know that our young learners, many of them come with a limited attention span. Some of that is age related. Some of that is environment related. So whether or not people want to point to technology or whatever it is, we just know that they come with a limited attention span. Okay, Louie. So there are techniques and strategies that I use already, and I'm looking for some other ideas. Okay. So what I would recommend for you to do is to start looking at the recruiting interest guideline and sustaining effort and persistence guideline. And you're like, hey, Louie, how do I look at that? Well, in your handy dandy list of things to look at, you will notice, I'm going to go here. I'm going to turn the page, keep going past the resources. And you see where it says CAST support documents. That's on the third one. And you can go to cast.org, the main one. And when you scroll down a little bit, you'll get to guidelines and it'll take you to the guidelines page. I'm also going to type the shortcut in here. I don't know why I didn't put the shortcut there, but I didn't. Okay. That gets you started learning about recruiting interest and sustaining effort and persistence. And what it's doing is it's triggering for you ideas. So for example, when you heighten the salience of goals and objectives, that's the first checkpoint. That means you're helping your learners understand what they need to accomplish in a set of time. So you're probably going to chunk things, right? For our younger students, we need to make sure we're chunking. We're making these into smaller bits and then, help them grow, right? But we're starting with small bits. But we need to let them know how long that small bit is. So when we help our learners start to understand that this is going to be over the passage of 3 minutes or 5 minutes, we know the concept of time is so challenging for young kids, right? And especially in our digital clocks versus our analog clocks. But this is a way that we can help them do that because we are helping them understand the goal. So the salience, the importance of it. Okay, I'm going to jump down to classroom schedule. I'm hoping you post your schedule in your classroom. So whether or not you're in a situation where your students are with you all day long, or whether you're in a situation where students are changing based on subject. I know that there are several schools I've worked with that starting in 4th grade, they start doing that. But either way, having a schedule there that's present that helps them understand what they're moving to. Visual schedules are really, really popular for supporting our students with perceptive disabilities. And so disabilities like maybe they're on the autism spectrum. And it's really beneficial for them to see what's coming next. And some of that has to do with them being able to self-regulate, right? I can hold on until I get to this. But for our other learners, it's just really good to start understanding how a schedule works. I taught at the middle school level, and I had students who loved to come up, and as we moved through the class, they would come up and erase first off my chalkboard because I'm that old, and then off my whiteboard. The students volunteered. I kept a list of their names, but nobody else saw the list because, of course, middle school, nobody wants to know that you volunteered for anything. So I would just say their name. And these are kids that wanted to do it. Christine or Randy or Malcolm or whatever. And they'd come up and they just got all excited about erasing what we just got done. They're part of the process. But the thing is here that you're helping them with their self-regulation, but then you can also read about executive functions. How are you helping them strategically move through that period of time? And finally, transitions, moving from one activity to another. We know that our learners need that. Gosh, think about representation. Think about language and symbols. How are you using your language, and what symbols are you using to help your students know that a transition is coming, or they're in the midst of a transition, or we're exiting a transition? So when you read about language and symbols and you specifically look at clarify vocabulary and symbols, or you think about illustrating through multiple media, you think about how are you illustrating that transition. It gets you thinking about how you're running your classroom. Okay. Finally, lessons are, as I put here, they're multidimensional, and I think a planning tool should be too. Also in your folder, I've included what I created for my book, which is a lesson planning flowchart. This is what your document looks like. And it's because when I look at lesson plans, they're single dimensions. It's just on a piece of paper, right? And you go through and you just fill in this box, and maybe you're answering a question. But I wanted to get people engaged with answering yes or no and really reflectively thinking, am I doing these things? Is my goal really standards driven? If it's not, you better go back up. And then does my goal allow for the flexible use of methods and materials? Or am I locking somebody into a certain method or a certain material? Well, if I am, then I better go back up here and rewrite that. Going down here, do you anticipate needing formative assessment data at this point in the lesson? You've just started your lesson. Do you think you're going to need formative assessment? Well, quite frankly, if you answer no, I still say, you know what, you're going to want to design a real quick, easy to apply formative assessment to have on hand anyway. Again, maybe you're perfect. I sure wasn't. And I would get a lesson started and realize I was too far ahead. I had to back up. And the only way I really knew that was because somebody fortunately helped me understand this early on. And so I always did a quick formative assessment in there. But you can also move through here and use this as a decision-making guide for yourself, and it will help you think about your implementation of the UDL framework and get you into using it. So I want to make sure that you understand that UDL is designed for any grade level. So preschool through 21, which means adults, right? People at the university level are using Universal Design for Learning. We're using it outside of education, any learning situation. It's really there to help you understand the quality of your strategies if you're just coming in, and even if you're experienced. But just as Laura Taylor talked about, As you dig in more and more and more, you're going to find the levels. You're going to find the layers. You're going to find your ahas. And you need to give yourself time. You've got to give yourself time to get to know this framework. I've been working with a particular district since 2007, and they are in it. They own it. But their teachers still come to a summer institute about UDL because they're so engaged to learn even more about the framework or how they can use the framework. All right. So we have just a little bit of time for just a little bit of application, possibly. In the chat, you'll see on the right hand of my screen, you would write the principle. So either you're thinking about engagement, or you're thinking about representation, you're thinking about action expression. You see these 3 strategies I've written: word wall, circle time, morning meeting, learning centers. How do you think the principle you've chosen would enhance or shift or has shifted what you do in one of those areas? So I'll give you an example. Engagement, learning centers. My idea. I figured out that my learning centers need to be themed based on like popular YouTube characters, just to get the kids over and into it, and their stories are related to it. It helped me really think about what was authentic to them and made them see, it connected to them. So start giving some ideas in here. Nice. So the word wall is for the students are helping put up the word wall or designing the word wall. Yep. Oh, well, I'm getting thank yous already. Well, this is very nice. Okay. You guys keep putting your ideas in here because you're going to keep sharing them. And last but not least, the UDL framework is too difficult to implement in grades K through 3. Is that a true or false? False, 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 false. I'm so happy to hear that. Okay. Next question. UDL framework can help me determine the quality of current strategies I'm using. Yes, yes, yes. True, 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 true. Yes, yes, yes. Yay. All right. I should give myself lots of time to learn about the deep and powerful framework. That's a leading question. Can you tell? Okay. All right. Oh, gosh. Thank you so much. I know we're like in the 2 minutes, and I think I'm going to see questions here. So sorry about that. Oh, my gosh. But I think that, and I can't wait to look at all your comments about the different things that you're doing in your classrooms. Feel free to contact me anytime. I have my Twitter handle there at the bottom. My website, theudlapproach.com, is also there. That has my contact information right there at the top of the main screen, or you can use the contact form. Please listen to the podcast, Passionate Educators. If you want to be on my podcast, send me an email because I've got some experienced people here. You can tell stories. That would be awesome. But thank you so much. Naya, I'm going to pass it back on over to you.
That was a great presentation. I know we have lots of questions, but before we get into the Q&A, I just want to give everyone a quick reminder and make sure they check their email after the webinar to see if they're one of the 3 lucky winners. I'll be contacting you soon to send you your copy of Louie's new book, Design and Deliver, Planning and Teaching Using Universal Design for Learning, the 2nd edition. So be on the lookout for that. And again, we just want to remind you, if you want to save 20%, you can go to brookspublishing.com, use the code edWebUDL, and you can get Louie's book. It has so much more information. And yeah, let's get into the Q&A portion. We have tons of questions. Okay, so let's start with this one. As a coach, refreshing my knowledge of UDL today, I see a challenge in teachers not wanting to let go and give students choice. Any advice?
So usually that's the, I have to control my environment, and I'm just scared that if I give them a choice that I'm going to lose that control. It's helping them find, it's scaffolding choice for them. It's helping them identify something that's non-threatening where they can give their first choice. And so seriously, for some, it's the color of the pen that the kids are using to write in. If that's too much, then it's the kids being able to decide if they want to stand or sit during a certain activity. And so make sure that the teacher understands you still have to give the kids parameters. Like, so morning meeting, let them stand up, but give them the parameter of while they're standing, they have to stay within their little box place, right? Or if they choose to sit down, that's fine, but they can't go up and down and up and down and up and down. They have to learn these things, but you're giving the teacher a scaffolded way for them to come into choice too.
Nice. And then kind of bouncing off that question, someone asked, how would you include students in the lesson planning stage?
Oh my gosh. Ooh, this is so exciting. Gosh, there are teachers that invite students to come in during lunch and sit with them. There are teachers that during this distance learning time have just said, hey, this is an open Zoom time, come. And they tell the kids, here's the topic and here's the goal, because you still have to own the standard and you still have to own the goal. That's important. But letting them understand what the goal of the lesson is, and then having them, asking them, so what do you think would be a great starter activity? How should we kick this lesson off? Or how do you think I could tell if you've learned this? What are some ways that I would know? Kindergartners, third graders, they all have ideas. They will all give them, and they'll be more engaged in your lesson.
That is great, and I'm sure people are definitely able to implement that. Another question, as a high school principal who loves UDL principles, what I would love to know more about are ways to help my teachers implement UDL without adding too much to their plates. We know our teachers are already super overworked. Simple strategies for teachers. Do you have any?
Yeah. So, there are a couple of different ways to go about this. If you've already, like, they know that UDL is a passion of yours and it's in your building and you're encouraging it, then you can help guide them through a specific learning about one of the guidelines or even one of the checkpoints. And they can help brainstorm some ideas of how to bring that checkpoint or guideline to life. And just as we talked about crowdsourcing earlier, they can choose from that. And if they already like, oh, I'm already doing that, then you just suggest, well, try another thing off of the list, or show the list to your students and see if they want to choose something off that list for you to try. It's scaffolding it. And sometimes you have to scaffold it and make it really narrow before you can start to grow. But once people start seeing the students responding to this, then they're eager to learn a little bit more, but you don't want to dump. Don't dump.
Right.
Don't dump.
I think we'll ask one more question just to be conscious of everyone's time. Somebody asked, any tips or strategies on how to implement the UDL framework in a virtual environment?
Yeah. So I gave a list of resources about UDL in the digital environment. So I would go to those. I can really easily speak to the one I wrote for Brooks. It sounds like I'm like doing self-promotion, doesn't it? But I honestly talked about, UDL and self-regulation during distance learning. Mm-hmm. So that was that bottom left-hand corner on the UDL framework, because that's so hard for our students. And I dug in just to that guideline. Again, start small. I would start in the emotions, start in the principle of engagement. Yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. I know we had so many questions. We're just going to wrap up the presentation. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. And again, just thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. And Louis, that was amazing. You gave so many great tips and resources. People were in the chat just talking about they were following people. They said this could have went on for longer, and I agree. It was awesome. So thank you again so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. And you're going to rock the quiz. Don't worry. I really prepared you well.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
All right. Bye-bye.